Okay, there you have it. Ichikawa shared his strategy. Removal, removal, removal. Take out cards that are going to be a little slower for him. And, Planeswalkers, Rakdos Return. He really feels like he needs to deal with Jackson's creatures right away.
Yeah, and I like that once you're taking out the Planeswalkers, you want to take out some of the Elvish Mystics. You have less 5-mana spells in your deck. You're not really interested in ramping as hard. So I think that sounds like a pretty cohesive sideboard plan.
Okay. We also had a chance to talk to Jackson Cunningham and find out what he was going to do. So, he felt like maybe he was, this wasn't a deck he was as prepared for and didn't have as many options. So let's hear how he's going to sideboard. All right, Jackson, what can we expect to see from you in game 2 of this matchup?
So I think he's playing like lots of blockers. He has some O3 walls, some 2/4 caryatids and coursers. So a lot of my low drops aren't as good. Like there's a Soldier of the Pantheon, I can't get through. I can't even charm it to get bigger. So taking out 3 of those and replacing it with 3 Unflinching Courage. Reasoning is it's not great, but it's better than the soldiers, and it'll help me push through. And he doesn't have tons of instant speed removal, and it gets around mortars if I get guys big. And then I'm also bringing in 2 of Johnny's Presence just for Amizium mortars and his random spot removal, and taking out 2 Sunblade Elves, which again are just like random 2/2s that can't really get through. Pretty simple, not hugely optimal, but I think it's the best plan.
What are you expecting to see from him after sideboard?
I'm pretty sure he brings in the Magma Sprays for Voice of Resurgence and just some of my little guys, which I'm taking out. And then he has Doom Blades, which are good. And he probably takes out Thought Seizes and potentially a few Planeswalkers.
Okay.
And brings in Golgari Charms, potentially.
Okay. Good luck the rest of the match.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, there you have it. So he seems to have a fairly reasonable sense of what Ichikawa is going to do. And what do you think about his plan?
Well, Jackson certainly isn't prepared for this matchup. Not that he should have been. This isn't, a hugely played deck, but his sideboard plan is definitely like, yeah, take out my 5 worst cards, add in 2 really good cards in Johnny's Presence, add 3 pretty medium cards in Unflinching Courage. And he even said that. I mean, he's well aware that these aren't great. What they are good at is, like you said, getting past mortars and trampling over blockers. So, if Ichikawa, let's say, plays a Xenagos, makes a token, then you go, Unflinching Courage my Smite or attack, that actually does negate that to some degree.
Sure. And how do you like the Johnny's Presence?
I think that card's excellent. I think that's his best card post-board, that he's bringing in, just because it's for 1 mana, it not only kills a removal spell, it trades for it. It also gives +1/+1. So if you're attacking, you're getting a little bonus there. And if you can strive it, you can, stop and overloaded mortars. And you're just trading for a more expensive spell at a time that's probably inopportune for your opponent.
I mean, I imagine that that's a card during the Swiss that had tremendous value. It's probably not a card you're thinking about.
Yeah, it's not a very commonly played card, but I think it's very effective in this matchup.
Does it lose a little value in a top 8, or is it still not that much you can do?
I mean, the fact that it costs 1 means that there's not a whole lot Ichikawa can do, but it does mean that he's not going to run into a Strive 1, like, I'm going to tap out to overload mortars and there's nothing he can do about it. I mean, he's not going to do that, whereas, I would be surprised if Jackson didn't get someone during the Swiss with, like, Supreme Verdict you. It's like, all right, cast, a Johnny's Presence, kill you, whereas they would not have done that if they knew he had those in his deck.
Right. Pretty jealous if that actually happened.
Yeah, countering a Planar Cleansing would be even better.
So what do you think about Ichikawa's deck now without Planeswalkers, right? It's just Jund.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable still. I mean, I still think I like Ichikawa's side of the matchup, though down a game, he's definitely not favored to win the match. That's not how probability
just simple
works.
math.
But it is a little, he is a little off the plan his deck is built to do. He has less cards that take advantage of it than, when Jund Monsters boards in a bunch of removal, it still has Storm Breath and Pelucranos to end the game.
Right.
Ichikawa's a little lighter on win conditions, so I think he can definitely have a game where he kills Jackson's first 3 or 4 creatures, but then doesn't actually apply enough pressure to end the game, whereas that's less true in a more threat-dense deck.
Okay. So, do you see Ichikawa being able to push this to 3, or do you think, has the tide turned a little?
I think he's pretty likely to. I mean, he's got a good shot. His removal spells are cheaper than Cunningham's creatures, and his Planeswalkers do provide an incremental advantage. Planeswalkers backed by cheap removal is an effective strategy, so I think that Ichikawa's got a pretty decent shot. I mean, as we saw, Johnny versus sorcery speed removal is pretty good, and a Johnny's presence plus a Johnny is actually a nice combo. It protects the guy that you're double striking and flying.
Yeah. But Doomblade obviously would have made a huge difference there.
Yeah, I mean, having Doomblade instead of Mortars there, though Ichikawa's not taking out Mortars.
Right.
But more having access to just more 2-mana removal spells, especially more instants, is a really big deal.
So he's just a kill everything deck right now, and have the last threat standing and finish the game off.
Yeah, I mean, his optimal plan is to get an advantage through having, Courser of Krufix in play, having Xenagos in play, and just having the game progress for multiple turns, whereas Cunningham's just trying to end the game.
Right.
I mean, I like the fact that Cunningham has a lot of instant speed creatures. Advent of the Worm does a pretty good job of, pressuring Planeswalkers. And it's also in Cunningham's favor that he took out some of the 1-drops that died to that Magma Spray that we just saw.
Right.
It's obviously very good against Voice of Resurgence, but if you look at Jackson's hand right now, I mean, besides the Celestia Charm, there's no good targets for Magma Spray. Magma Spray does not match up well against Fleecemane Line and Advent of the Worm.
No. Fleecemane Line making a case for itself to be a real player in the coming year between the last Pro Tour and this Pro Tour.
Oh yeah, definitely. We saw 8 in this top 8, and we saw 4 in the winning deck of the last Pro Tour.
All right, here we go. We're ready for Game 2 of the quarterfinal match between Jackson Cunningham and Yuuki Ichikawa.
Straight on.
Right, and once again we start scrying. Wow, we like that one though. We're keeping that on
Yeah,
top.
it looked like a Temple of Abandon, which is insta-top, since I think Ichikawa kept a kind of land-light hand with a Scry land, which is generally a good thing to do. It's one of the powers of Scry lands.
Yeah.
Get a look at Scavenging Ooze.
Scavenging Ooze is a card I really like bringing in here. Ichikawa has access to. It's a card that when you've killed a bunch of your opponent's creatures does actually end the game. This is the threat he's looking for. It actually gains a bunch of life, becomes a 5/5 or a 6/6. So I think that is one of the cards that he's actually going to get a pretty good value out of post board. Doesn't come with Magma Spray though.
No, and now he's got to deal with a Fleecemane Lion.
Yeah, and Ichikawa's got some good options here. I mean, he can play a Caryatid, which he would have liked to be able to play last turn, but he just drew it this turn. And he didn't have untapped green even, so.
Right.
But he can also just kill it right away. I like playing Caryatid. If, a couple turns later, he would have wanted to kill it before it becomes monstrous, but no real danger of that right now. And I think Mortars is the card that rewards you the most for saving it because it turns into a Plague Wind later. Of course, Fleecemane Lion, pretty much the best 2 in this matchup, just because Voice does die to Magma Spray and does not attack past Caryatid without the aid of Celestia Charm.
Yeah, it wasn't entirely clear. Jackson sounded like he might be thinking about even taking some of the voices out at some point.
Huh. Yeah, I don't think he wants to do that, even if they don't interact well with some of the cards that Yuki has against removal decks. They're just good enough. It also makes it so you can play Voice before trying to do an Ajani attack, which forces Ichikawa to either respond or give you a Voice token, either of which you're fairly happy with.
Wow, I mean, Jackson's just curving out here though. Best 3-drop, best 2-drop, best 3-drop. He's going to be able to make a 5/5 4-drop at instant speed.
Yeah, this is an optimal hand. Ichikawa is going to have to, I think, use the Mortars before he wants to here. I don't think he can just, take a giant hit.
Plus, there's just Celestia Charm and a Boon Satyr to make things even more complicated as Jackson has untapped mana.
Yeah, Ichikawa is heavily incentivized to play his spells at sorcery speed in this matchup, just because once Jackson has mana untapped, between Celestia Charm, Boon Satyr, and then Ajani's Presence, he's got a lot of ways to foil Ichikawa's removal spells, and you really don't want to get hit by any of those because that's going to end up usually leading to a loss. If you try to kill something and then it gets Ajani's Presence when it's hitting you for 5, that's just
You know how Rich was getting shivers every time even Flock played an Elixir of Immortality? That's how I feel anytime someone casts an Ajani's Presence.
Yeah. And even people are bringing up that a Voice doesn't interact all that well with Courser and Caryatid. The fact is the other removal cards in Jackson's sideboard just aren't good. I mean, it's better than a Skylasher or a Cetessan Tactics. Those aren't the kind of cards you want in this matchup. So certainly it's not the card you would love to have, but it is better than the other options.
Here comes the Scavenging Ooze.
And Ichikawa deciding whether he wants to play an untapped land to grow the ooze after casting a Mortars or not. He could potentially, it looks like Mortars plus ooze is the combo here. could potentially be trying to set up some kind of magma spray hand, but using double magma spray is not really what you want to be doing. He could double magma spray the line or something like that. Ichikawa could also offer the trade here of Ooze for Fleecemane, but that, after eating the Smiter, but that leads you into a bad place via Celestia Charm. Another reason that Ichikawa also didn't play the Abrupt Decay in his hand is that it kills Advent of the Worm tokens very, very well.
Yeah. Dead.
Whereas Mizzy Mortars does not, even though Mizzy Mortars does do a good job overloaded, and he could have overloaded it next turn.
Yeah, I was
just
going to say, next turn he was going to be able to kick it. But didn't really want to put himself in a position of taking a lot of damage here and being maybe one jump in the air away from losing.
Yeah, Ichikawa was really hoping to draw another removal spell to kind of like bridge the gap between Mortars being kicked and Mortars not being kicked, but he didn't hit that. He hit double Magma Spray instead, and as I said before, Cunningham's hand was not conducive to getting destroyed by Magma Spray. So Ichikawa was pretty much forced into playing the way he did, I think. I don't think he could just take a giant hit there.
I mean, the double Magma Spray is probably going to be pretty sweet for him if Cunningham decides to sink 5 mana into that Fleecemane line.
Yeah, that could work out. I kind of like an attack by Cunningham there. He doesn't actually want Ichikawa to trade there, but maybe Ichikawa won't. I mean, this does completely represent Advent, which Ichikawa is prepared for, and I would estimate that Ichikawa wants to Abrupt Decay it right away to not get destroyed by Johnny's Presence.
Okay.
Yep, here comes the Advent, end of the turn.
How many casts? 4. Okay.
So the upside of not killing it now is that Jackson might make an attack based on having the worm, or might even do something like just a Johnnying it. But the downside is that Johnny's Presence, you just lose the game. So I think it's a little risky unless Ichikawa has a reason to believe that Cunningham does not have a Johnny's Presence in hand, since he is aware that Cunningham's boarding it in. There's no way that isn't happening.
So you want to take a look and see? We have some notes about how these guys actually did sideboard. See if they were holding true to what they said in the interviews.
Looks like it. Ichikawa did the planeswalkers he cut were the 2 Chandras and the 4 Xenagos. So that left room for basically putting in all the removal, plus a Thoughtseize in the sideboard,
double 9.
plus the double Ooze, which makes sense.
Here we go. So before Jackson gets a chance to untap, he's like, I'm going to Abrupt Decay your token,
Sure.
and I'm going to double Magma Spray your Fleecemane Lion.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, that just makes it so Celestia Charm and a Johnny's Presence no longer save anything. The board is cleared, and it forces Cunningham to have more threats and potentially more ways to protect them. And if Cunningham drew, maybe 2 ways to protect them, that could strand them in his hand.
That's Ichikawa's empty-handed.
Yeah,
at
he
this
is
point.
hellbent.
So Experiment 1, followed by Voice of Resurgence, and a pair of 2/2s on the board for Jackson Cunningham.
And Ichikawa, again, really looking for a way to get a recurring advantage here, because he doesn't have much in the way of actual card advantage without his Planeswalkers. So this is the risk, is that he traded 3 removal spells for 3 threats, but at the end of the day, Cunningham has like a lot of threats in his deck, and Ichikawa just drawing removal is not necessarily going to finish things off. Advent also making Scavenging Ooze a little less effective.
So the Loxodon Smiter gets exiled from the graveyard, and Scavenging Ooze becomes a 3/3. Ichikawa goes up to 16. Now we're in Boonsader land.
And while both decks actually have the same land count, Ichikawa has a bunch of Scry lands, the temples, which mean that as the game goes on, he will get some advantage out of doing that. He's going to flood a lot less in the late game. But he still needs to draw like a Nissa. A Nissa would be perfect here.
He doesn't take that Planeswalker out, huh?
No, and it's interesting because Xenagos is, I think, the slightly more powerful card just because it's cheaper and, gives haste and all that. But Nissa does, interact with Jackson's creatures much, much better in this matchup.
Basically, all you do is just make a 4/4 every turn.
Yeah, I mean, Ichikawa doesn't have a ton of force to untap. And eventually, Ultimate, the Ultimate, is actually good, so especially in a matchup without sweepers. So.
You see Jackson thinking. Now he's like,
he's in pretty good shape here. I mean, he's got a Boon Satyr he can bestow. He's got a Celestia Charm. Like, he's going to be able to make an attack. He's going to be able to play a trick, and it's not going to work out all that well for Ichikawa unless he has a removal spell in hand, and that's what, of course, Jackson has to think about.
Right.
He has to decide which removal really gets me here and how do I play around it.
He was also counting, seeing if there were any creatures in Ichikawa's yard.
Yeah,
he wanted to
Scavenging
make sure that
Ooze is-
Scavenging Ooze wasn't going to do anything that he wasn't expecting. Of course, the problem with that is a removal spell could put a creature in Jackson's yard.
Yeah, and especially if it's, say, another Abrupt Decay where Ichikawa goes for it, or Jackson goes for it, and Ichikawa Abrupt Decays the Boon Satyr itself, and then eats it with Scavenging Ooze. Though Ichikawa actually only has the one Abrupt Decay, so I guess that answers that. And that's the sort of thing that only happens in the top 8. In the Swiss, you're never going to know if they have 1, 2,
Right,
3 Abrupt
right.
Decays. But in the top 8, you can actually, remember these things, and it actually rewards you for remembering which of his cards are 1-ofs, which are 2-ofs, etc.
Do you stress that in playtesting? Do you go, this is there's only one of this? If you see it, you know that you're clear of that, or is that just something that you internalize and just kind of know through a million tournament reps?
It's kind of tough because when you're playtesting before the tournament, you don't want to know what's exactly in your opponent's deck because that's just not a tournament condition.
Sure.
When you're playtesting for the top 8, you should be reminding your opponent of that. Your playtesting opponent, so they kind of get in the hang of things.
Okay, Sylvan Caryatid gets in the way of Voice of Resurgence here on the attack. No blocks on Experiment 1.
And this is a good block. If the Caryatid dies, then the ooze gets bigger. You're not really risking much. You don't need the Caryatid. This kind of forces Jackson to do something, because even though this is a profitable attack either way, he has to do more damage than this. So, yeah, I like just going for the throat here. The Caryatid, again, doesn't do a whole lot, and this way there's nothing to feed the ooze, and you're taking, 6 damage right now, which sets up a Johnny being a great jaw.
Yeah, I've been shocked by how good. I heard you were not a big Johnny Caller of the Pride fan in playtesting.
No, Ifro and I were on the Pat's Naya deck until the day before the tournament, actually, but where Pat played 3 Ajani and 1 Boros Charm, we were probably going to play 2 and 2.
Okay.
I mean, we still liked the card. It just we liked Boros Charm because it was cheaper. Though Ajani did so much work for Pat that
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised he didn't share his deck list with us. If he had only told us Naya was great.
He is a bad teammate.
Yeah. That or he said, Naya was great every day for the past 6 months. One of the two.
There's a second Scavenging Ooze.
Yeah, Scavenging Ooze is not a card that's actually great in
Yeah,
multiples. They compete for food, and only one can, grow giant.
Go.
And so Cunningham has to be thinking here, if Ichikawa had the ooze, he would have played it last turn. So he just drew the ooze. And if he had a removal spell, he probably would have also played it last turn. Unless it was a sorcery speed well, in which case he would have just cast it just now. So it's pretty likely that Ichikawa does not have a great card in hand.
Which just drew an Advent of the Worm.
Well, that makes things even easier, because before then, if you drew an Ajani, you'd have to think about whether you want to go for it. Advent's actually perfect, because it lets you just attack, and then just leave mana up to, at some point, cast it without, fear of really anything going wrong. It also even evolves Experiment 1 right now.
Because the toughness on the Experiment 1 is only 4.
Yep, it's still, it's the last thing that can evolve Experiment 1, given that it's, a crawl worm, but it still does the trick.
The final evolution. So Jackson's only attack is with...
Obviously more time to think and stuff in this round.
They're asking him to speed up now.
a classic Cunningham.
Okay.
We have more time, right? I like thinking. By the way, just a reminder, there's in addition to the video coverage we're doing, you can go back and sort of go through this play-by-play and the text coverage that's being produced for each of these matches. So, there'll be a sort of permanent document of what happened. Or you can just rewatch this video.
Yeah. Live coverage is great. Cunningham, again, very worried about removal because Ichikawa, he's playing a lot of 1 and 2-ofs. There's so many different cards he could have in hand. I still think that this attack is pretty safe.
There you go. He attacks with the...
Wait 1 second.
The voice attack may be a little less safe just because he doesn't have a way to pump it, and it just feeds the Scavenging Ooze with the Voice of Resurgence token not being, great. But I think unless Cunningham comes to the conclusion that he should not be attacking with Experiment 1, there's really no way for this turn to go badly for him. Even, whether he attacks with Voice or not, he's still going to end up in good shape. I do like not attacking with Voice for whatever it's worth.
6-4, yeah.
So a double block here could potentially try and kill the Experiment 1, but we could see something pretty sweet, which is, mid-combat regeneration by evolving it with the Advent, then removing 2 tokens to regenerate it, and then still having it be a 5/3, which is enough to kill the both scavenging oozes. So Ichikawa kind of just steering clear of that train wreck and just offering up Caryatid as a sacrifice.
All right. So just the Caryatid gets in the way.
Okay.
He's like, okay, it dies. Great.
Yeah, and even if, with a Celestia Charm, there's no real reason to just use it to just deal 5 right there. I think it's going to come in handy later. Ichikawa thinking, where do you want to put the Scavenging Ooze counter? The longer you wait, the more options you have, but, you are giving up a green mana.
Right, and you also just want to use your mana efficiently, right?
Yeah, though Ichikawa did end up tapping such that he could not represent black removal once his Caryatid died, which kind of doesn't sell the bluff as well as it could have.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how much information is conveyed in even the tapping of mana. Even like what you're just representing. We watch the player. By leaving Ben Stark by leaving blue and 1 open in a limited round. Just completely get his opponent to play around a card that wasn't in his deck for several turns.
Yeah, and thinking about it and tapping your mana is a way to kind of tell your opponent what's in your hand, represent something you don't have, or if conceal things you do have if you purposely tap so you can't cast them.
Oh, interesting.
Like if you're very sure you don't want to cast, say, an Abrupt Decay, and you just tap it so you can't cast it, and you have to be very sure because this does cost you something. But if you do that, your opponent's going to be like, well, he doesn't have Abrupt Decay, or otherwise he would have left up 2 Overgrown Tombs. Instead, he just tapped them. So that is something that you can use if you're pretty sure of how the turn's going to go.
Ichikawa, what is he holding? Did he draw something relevant this turn?
Looks like he did. Since he also played the Llanowar Waste, which looks like he's.
Okay.
Can I get the English text on that card?
Yes. You have it?
So he's playing a Putrefy.
No pain lands. No damage lands.
What damage?
Like no, are any of those? Do you take damage?
It's like, what lands did you tap?
Yeah. So what Cunningham wants to know, actually, though, is whether Putrefy can allow regeneration, which it does not, because otherwise he could play Advent to evolve and then regenerate Experiment 1. As it turns out, the Experiment 1 is going to head to the graveyard.
You have 0 cards.
Okay. One creature.
Right.
I think at this point, Cunningham is just letting his Experiment 1 hit the bin. And Ichikawa, of course, doing the sorcery speed in order to not trigger Voice of Resurgence, which is a big deal. Let's Boon Satyr attack without getting stuck onto an Experiment 1.
All right, it's the Advent of the Worm. Cunningham keeps reaching for the die.
Yeah.
His opponent keeps handing him a worm token.
So the oozes are potentially redistributing that ++1 counter from Experiment 1 pretty much anywhere. Got a Mutavault back to block with. So Ichikawa does have, creatures you can block with, but Celestia Charm on Advent of the Worm does present, a pretty big threat.
Right. There's actually 2 creatures he can eat here, right? There's still the Caryatid in his yard, then there's the...
And Ichikawa chooses not to eat the carrot at the end of turn because he doesn't know where the counter wants to go. If it was just 1 ooze, I think he would eat it. Another thing he has to consider, too, is if ooze becomes a 5/5, it gets Celestia Charmed. So I think he's going to want to, a lot of the times, end up with like 2 4/4s for as long as he can. And Ichikawa did want to tap that Llanowar Waste, I think. I mean, maybe he's just planning on activating Mutavault and is pretty sure of it, but leaving a painful green instead of painless green is a little better with Scavenging Ooze.
Oh, yeah. Jackson Cunningham sends everything into the red
Yeah,
zone.
there's so many permutations of blocks here with, a ooze that's potentially a 4/4, ooze that's potentially a 3/3, Mutavaults plus an ooze that can even grow bigger off if you don't activate Mutavault eating the second creature, that I think it's pretty tough to figure out exactly how Ichikawa is going to block, but by attacking with 3 creatures that are pretty tough and that you don't mind losing, Jackson just basically putting the ball in Ichikawa's court and making him make a decision and commit to something, which lets you use Celestia Charm a lot better. I'd be surprised if Ichikawa could really afford to play too much around Celestia Charm here. I mean, the best way to play around Celestia Charm might be doing something like blocking the worm with like both oozes and then activating them twice, making like a 4/4 and a 3/3. So you lose one ooze naturally, and then both if you have Celestia Charm, but then the worm dies. But then he goes down to 4 and it has a Mutavault against the 2 token, or the voice and the Boon Satyr. I guess you gain a 2 off the oozes, but you lose 1 back to Llanowar Waste, so it is tough. It's no matter what comes out of this, Ichikawa is not going to be in a good situation. I don't think he dies this turn unless he basically doesn't block 9 power worth of creature and gets Celestia Charmed, but that seems fairly unlikely. But regardless, he's going to have to draw basically probably 2 or 3 good spells in a row while Cunningham draws nothing. So, and that's assuming he doesn't make blocks, so he just gets destroyed by Celestia Charm, which might not even be wrong. I mean, he might just do the math here and realize he can't beat a Celestia Charm, so just assume it doesn't exist.
It looks like he's thinking about the Mutavault here. Pulling that Llanowar Waste back, so that looks like, yep. That is going to animate a Mutavault. It looks like he's thinking about putting it in front of a Boon Satyr.
Mutavault on Boon Satyr is, I think, one of the better blocks, just because you're not really getting out of, dying if you attack the Boon, or you block the Boon Satyr with any of your creatures. You might as well throw Mutavault, there's the least value. So you could do something like Boon Satyr gets blocked by Mutavault, and then Voice gets blocked by an ooze, and then you just take 5. Celestia Charm it kills your ooze, but you don't take 1,000,000 damage.
I like the slow,
yeah.
Exaggerated horror movie creeping forward of the creatures into the red zone to block.
So here you do get a successful trade. So now it's actually up to Cunningham. He can either Celestia Charm. Actually, if he Celestia Charms the Voice, the ooze becomes a 5/5. So I think you just let the Voice die, and then maybe just let the Boon Satyr die. You could also Celestia Charm the Boon Satyr, which basically trades Celestia Charm, since the ooze is dying either way, for 2 +1/+1 counters out of the graveyard, and a little bit of extra damage.
Right, you get a point of Llanowar Waste damage in.
Yeah. That is value. I don't think that you want to Celestia Charm the Voice. Charming the Voice, you end up with the ooze that's still just bigger than it, so you actually don't really, get anything out of that. Charming the Boon Satyr is also not great. These are good blocks. I think that just getting in a fight with the Worm token is just too risky. And this way, Ichikawa guarantees that at least some number of creatures are heading to the graveyard, which can then make the oozes bigger. So what I think Jackson wants to do is save the Celestia Charm and end up using it to exile an ooze once it hits 5/5, because Ichikawa is going to eventually want to make a 5/5 ooze, most likely. I mean, he might be playing around Celestia Charm and try to keep them both at 4/4, but one's dying to the Boon Satyr.
That's priority.
So given that priority's passed by Cunningham, which I like, Ichikawa's going to, I think, just let things stand. You end up trading ooze for Boon Satyr, you end up eating the Voice. You get a Voice of Resurgence token, you take 5, but then end of turn you can start growing the ooze. And what I think, is unavoidable is this ooze becoming a 5/5, which means Celestia Charm's going to exile it, which means Ichikawa does need to draw an answer to that worm right away.
Cool. Game on.
So we go to a 4/4 ooze.
So Ichikawa has 2 draw steps now, potentially. I mean, he's got a Mutavault to chump with, and he's getting a little bit of life off the Scavenging Ooze. Didn't use the Llanowar Waste to grow at end of turn, which maybe because he didn't want to take a point, maybe because he's playing on Celestia Charm. It is tough.
He does have a nice little burst of life gain in him here, though, right? Like there's enough creatures in the graveyard that he can, even if it's getting charmed, he can say, okay, well, I'm going to gain 4 here.
Yeah, there's like 4 more creatures in the graveyard, so that gives Ichikawa a little bit of breathing room, but I think the Celestia Charm is still going to be really good here.
Yeah, it's going to be, to quote someone who's come through the booth a couple times this weekend. Devastating.
I knew that was coming.
There you get a look at Selesnya Charm. All of its glory. Target creature gets +2/+2 and trample. Exile target Scavenging Ooze with power 5 or greater. Or put a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance onto the battlefield. The least used mode.
Yeah, though it is also the fact that it can be even if it's just like a kind of medium 2-drop, having a 2-drop when you don't have a 2-drop is really important. I think Selesnya Charm is one of the best cards basically for any of these decks. Pat Cox played 4 is one of the best cards in that deck. So I think it just all the modes do things that really matter, like killing Obsidian or Desecration Demon or Polukranos that +2/+2 and trample on like a giant boon satyred creature. All the things added together are really, really good. And the fact that the worm token has trample already means this turn's going to go really, really well for Cunningham. Ichikawa could make a really heads-up play here. He's got an option to animate Mutavault, double block, and then just offer the trade of Ooze for a worm. The problem is that doesn't leave him with an advantage here. I think he's going to have to just go for blocking the worm, making the Ooze giant, and then losing it to Selesnya Charms. It inches, like it oozes over to the worm there. So even though I think Ichikawa's dreading the Selesnya Charm and well aware of it, I agree with his decision to just walk into it. Like, if you just trade for the worm token, I don't think you're really getting an advantage. You're going to end up losing the game. And I think here you're just in much better shape if this does work. Of course, if it doesn't work, well, we're about to see what happens when it doesn't work. It involves Ichikawa going down to a very low life total, depending on how many creatures he removes, as the worm just tramples over the exiled.
Yes.
So Ichikawa's just offering the trade, but
so now he has to just use.
Wow, that was awesome.
Wow.
Golgari Charm. I didn't see that in his hand. That was an awesome draw.
Golgari Charm. All creatures get -1/-1. His Scavenging Ooze becomes a 4.
Yeah. So now the Ooze doesn't die to Charm. Charm resolves. He regrows the Ooze. It kills the worm. Then it kills the Advent token or the Restoration or Resurgence token because it has -1/-1, and now there's no worm token in play. Not only was that masterful, it actually works out perfectly for Ichikawa. He might just run away with the game now.
In an unforeseen turn of events.
Turns out Golgari Charm was just the best possible draw.
Yeah. See.
Game up.
Yep. Gain 1. Go to 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says pass.
Is that English? Can I see this card?
Cunningham getting to read the card. It's going to be his unmaking this game, I expect. I mean, the game isn't over, but now Ichikawa's going to have a giant Scavenging Ooze ready to just roll on over, and Cunningham doesn't have actually very many turns to kill it. It's going to just get out of control.
Yeah. Yep, there goes the Advent token. There goes the Resurgence token. And here comes the Scavenging Ooze. No reason to hold back now.
No, and
sink all your mana into it.
And if Cunningham had another like Advent or any instant speed creature, I think he would have played it after the Golgari Charm to keep the voice token alive.
20.
Right.
So I think you can just assume he's got nothing. I mean, there aren't any cards he could have in his hand that are relevant that he would not have played. So you just go for it at this point.
I love Magic.
Yeah, that was awesome.
I don't think I've ever seen that interaction before.
Yep, I have not either.
Sorry.
We now have a 3-turn clock. No, maybe
It's just a 2-turn
2-turn clock.
Yeah.
Forgot about the
So now Cunningham actually just has to peel here, or he's just dead. And even if he does, I think he's in the kind of the abyss lock. He has to draw like Voice of Resurgence to block for 2 turns. He could just draw Selesnya Charm to kill the Ooze, successfully this time. But he does not have a lot of time to draw it.
Draw.
Drawing a card.
How many cards?
No cards.
Ichikawa, once again, hellbent.
from Jackson Cunningham.
It looks like he drew a mana confluence, so it looks like the game's actually over here.
Oh my God! Wow, that was unbelievable.
Yeah,
Just
that
a
was-
perfect top deck. Great understanding of how his cards interacted with each other,
and then good execution.
and then